Hello, my lovelies. We are back to chapter 4, talking about loan payments these are actually pretty close to reality. Not as bad as some of the previous stuff we saw. Interest rates are really high. All right. So for any loan, the principal, and it is spelled that way, is the amount of money owed at any particular time. Interest is charged on the principal of the loan. To pay off a loan, you must gradually pay down the principal. The loan term is the time you have to pay back the loan in full. Okay, so what we're going to investigate here is kind of the starting information that would be put in front of you, and then figuring out what are the monthly loans going to be based on the information they gave you. So the APRs are kind of high, but those are yearly rates, and we are actually going to be dividing them by 12, and it'll be a smaller rate per month. So see APR over N in the formula. Alrighty. A student loan totaling $7,500. That's a lot of good scholarships. When you graduate from college, the interest rate is 9%, and loan term is 10 years. What are your monthly payments? So we are going to plug them back into that formula and see what we get. So we are going to start with 7,500 times APR as a decimal is 0.09 over 12. And then on the bottom, we have a crazy mess. So we have brackets, 1 minus parenthesis, 1 plus 0.09 over 12 to the negative 12 times 10 years. So the brackets are just like parentheses. They're only used here so they look different from the parentheses that are inside. And to emphasize that you really do need those brackets around the bottom. If you type it without it, the whole problem. And now we get the joy of crunching this on the calculator. So let's see if I can convince Office or OneNote to do it. Here's our first bottom set, 1 minus the second bottom set, 1 plus 0.09 over 12. It'll do the division before the addition. It does follow order of operations. And then negative 120. Close and close. What? So $95.01. All right. Now, if you're curious, if we take that 9501 times the 120 payments, you are going to actually pay over the course of 10 years, $11,401.20. Which if you then subtracted the 7,500 off, you're going to see it's almost $4,000 extra. But that's the price of taking a loan. You're borrowing against your ability to repay it in the future. All right, so now slightly different. $9K for the loan, and the interest rate is 7.5. Loan term is 10 years. What are your monthly payments? So again, I'm just going to type in 9,000 times 0.075, convert it to a decimal, divided by 12. Even though they don't say, we make the assumption that it's always n is going to be 12. If they want a different n, they have to tell us. So otherwise, we just assume everything we're talking about is monthly payments because that's how nearly everything works except for like payday loans, which should not be called loans and should just be outlawed. All right, 1 minus open 1 plus 0.075 over 12 close to the open. Negative 12 times 10 again is negative 120. And close the bottom. So we have $106.83. So that is what you would type into Alex for this. You round it up or down in the cents. Now, how much will you end up paying total? We're going to take that amount of money, the rounded one, not the unrounded one. And we are going to say take that times the 120. So I'm actually going to pay $12,819.60. And then how much will you have paid in interest alone? I'm going to subtract off the 9K, and that is how much extra? $3,819.60. So that is more than a third of the amount you borrowed that you end up paying extra. This is why having a loan where the government pays the interest while you're in school is really important. Hold on to the unsubsidized loans and be very, very happy, because when you get to grad school, they go away. Or sorry, subsidized loans. They're unsubsidized when you get to grad school, meaning the interest is building. Sucks. Now we are just going to do the same thing again, just with new terms. So 8,500 times, now our interest rate is 8.08 over 12. And then divide that by 1 minus, another open, 1 plus 0.08 over 12. Close to the open, negative, and again, another 120. Alrighty, so that is going to be $103.13. So the total amount of money we're going to pay is going to be our monthly payment times the 120 times we will make that payment to pay a total of $12,375.60. And then we're going to subtract off the 8,500. So 3875.60. So the APR is a little bit more here, but the amount borrowed was 500 less. And you actually end up paying a little bit more in interest. So that interest rate makes a difference. All right, I'm going to pause it and go to the next one.